Hello. Today I want to talk about when I first learned how to play Magic the Gathering. The year was 2002. I was a teenager. The most recent set to have come out was Judgment, part of the Odyssey block. And when I first learned how to play Magic, I just remember thinking, wow, this is a really interesting card game. They really put a lot of stock in the graveyard and caring about having a certain number of cards in the graveyard, and Threshold was just so important. And then you had Madness. And Odyssey block was a very mechanic heavy set. And I think it was a very interesting time to jump into the game because I had my preconceived notions about what Magic was, and well, Magic's a set that cares about the graveyard and it cares about discarding cards. And then the next block came around, and that was Onslaught block, where it was all creature and tribal focus, and there were not nearly as many graveyard synergies or discard strategies. And I thought, oh well, I guess Magic's more than just discarding graveyards and all that. It can also be creature based and caring about specific tribes. And then after that, then came Mirrodin block, and then I realized, oh, I guess Magic can also be about artifacts and caring about the number of artifacts you have in play. And those were my first few experiences with Magic, those first few sets. And I realized that Magic could be anything, and I loved it. I've loved it ever since. I've been playing the game for more than 20 years now, and I was there when they went from the old border to the new modern border back in Mirrodin block. I still have a soft spot for the old border, especially when it comes to the foils. This is Spelljack. So this was the first card I ever opened from a booster pack, the first rare, I should say. And it technically was not this one. I opened a non-foil version. Foils was still pretty hard to find at the time, but at some point I picked up a foil copy just to remind myself of the first card I opened. And I think it was a very fitting card for me, just in order to give me an idea of what was possible. And Spelljack is an instant for 6 mana, 3 blue, blue, blue. It says counter target spell. If it's countered this way, remove it from the game instead of putting it into its owner's graveyard. As long as it remains removed from the game, you may play it as though it were in your hand without paying its mana cost. If it has X in its mana cost, X is 0. And so Spelljack introduced a whole new concept to me. When I opened that, I was like, oh, there are cards that let you play your opponent's cards. Well, that's interesting. And you can play them without paying their mana cost. Like, this card told me so much about the game and about how Magic could just change the rules. Like, normally the spell would go to the graveyard, but instead you put it into exile, and normally you have to pay the cost for the card, but with this you don't have to. And so for me, it was just very interesting to see how Magic had all these rules, but at the same time, all those rules could be changed and altered, and it was just a constantly evolving game. And that notion was further cemented as we saw new and new expansions, each with their different themes that would come along. And of course, as I learned more about the game and what came before, I realized that Mirrodin wasn't the first Magic the Gathering block that revolved around artifacts. There had been others in the past, like in the Urza block or in Antiquities. And so they've gone back to artifact themes several times, but I'll always have a soft spot in my heart for the first Mirrodin block, even though it was really broken, just about as busted as the original Urza blocks, which is why I think they've tried to be very cautious about subsequent artifact-themed blocks, just because of how pushed several of these were. But I have some cards I've collected. At one point I liked collecting foreign language cards, back before Magic had all these textless versions and tons of just different art treatments. If you wanted to really have your cards stand out, you'd have them be in a foreign language. And so I had a foil Mindslaver that is, let me see if I can take it out here, get a better view for the camera, but a foil Mindslaver which is in German. And so I just thought that looked super cool. So you may notice Spelljack and Mindslaver. So you like taking people's spells and you like taking over their turns. And it's like, well, maybe it's not the most fun to play against, but to me it just seems so cool to be able to do that, to take your opponent's stuff and use it against them, or to make choices that were not advantageous for them. Another card from when I first started playing the game was when Unhinged came out in 2004, and so I'd never, I missed Unglued. That was the first one that came out. But I remember going to an Unhinged pre-release, and it was a lot of fun. I remember they had Enter the Dungeon, I want to say it was. You play a sub-game of Magic under the table, and then when that's done, you go back to your seats and continue on the game you were playing before. And so it was so much fun to go and do that and to play Magic with all these weird and unique rules and all these joke cards. It really left an impression on me, showing that Magic didn't have to take itself seriously. And this was before Commander was really recognized as a format or anything, before it even existed, I want to say. And my experience or my exposure to Magic had been very focused 1v1 competitive formats. And so Unhinged was just sort of a way to show me that Magic could be casual, Magic could be fun, and it didn't have to be so competitive. But even with the jokes said, I was still drawn to the overly complicated cards with Ambiguity, which has 7 lines of rules text, which by today's standards is not that much, but back then it really helped to emphasize how convoluted the card effect was. Ambiguity is an enchantment for 4 mana, 2 and 2 blue. It says whenever a player plays a spell that counters a spell that has been played, or a player plays a spell that comes into play with counters, that player may counter the next spell played, or put an additional counter on a permanent that has already been played, but not countered. And so it was intentionally worded as confusingly as possible, which, with the way Magic templating has gotten, doesn't make as much sense anymore, because you don't play spells anymore. You play lands, but you cast spells. So the wording doesn't exactly quite work, and things don't come into play. They enter the battlefield, or now to further shorten it, they just enter. So again, the wording would not work on a card like this today, but they were poking fun at the fact that you play spells and things come into play, but then also that counter could be like a counter spell or +1/+1 counter. And so I think that they could still probably try to work this in and have it be a black bordered card with a few tweaks. But yeah, I think it was fun. And for those trying to figure out, well, what does this card do exactly? I mean, basically, if you either play a counter spell or something that counters an effect, you've got 2 options. You can either get you can either counter the next spell that's played that turn, or you can add a counter of the same kind on something that already has a counter. And you also get that same effect if you play a spell that comes into play with counters. And so the way that you can make this work, if you were to try and actually use it in a Magic game, if your table allows silver bordered cards, this would be a great one to use if you're playing like some kind of Simic counters deck, to where you care about playing a bunch of creatures in with counters, and especially if they have flash, because then you can flash in a creature with counters and use it to counter an opponent's spell. That seems really strong. But the other one is you can also just do it to add counters onto permanents. It's not a full proliferation to where you can put a whole bunch of counters on at once, but you just get 1 extra counter on something when you play a spell that either counters or enters with counters. So I liked Ambiguity. It was purposefully worded as confusingly as possible. Still not as confusing as Chains of Mephistopheles, though, but still very confusing. But that's it. Those are a few of the cards that have a special place in my heart from when I was still really new to playing Magic the Gathering. And I have to say that it's still one of my favorite hobbies. Magic's meant a lot to me over the years, and I'm grateful for the game. I'm grateful for the community. I love that I'm able to express myself through deck building, and I'm grateful to Commander, because I think that was a really, it's quintessentially what Magic is to me. It's about self-expression, and you can do that too in constructed play, tournament play. You can bring like your signature build somewhere. But I like the low stakes nature of Commander. I like being able to just kind of sit down, show off what your deck is intended to do, and that was one of the reasons why I fell in love with the format as soon as I heard about it, even before it was officially acknowledged by WotC or they started making their own Commander decks. And so I see a lot of people worrying about the future of Magic with Universes Beyond and a lot of decisions they were making, and I think Magic will be all right. I think that it has its flaws. It has some issues in terms of management and decisions made with the game that are to its detriment. But I think Magic survives and thrives in spite of, at times, poor management because of the gathering, of the player base, of the community. But anyways, thank you so much for listening. This was fun to sort of go back and look through some of the first Magic cards I collected and ones that held special place in my heart. I appreciate you taking time to indulge me on this, and I'll be back later with more cards to discuss. So thank you very much, and take care. Bye.